The blue-skinned creature stood barely 3 feet tall, her large amber eyes reflecting the dying campfire's glow. Kevin wiped blood from his sword blade, the metal still warm from the day's brutal fighting. Around them, the alien forest of Zarian Prime whispered with sounds no human ear was meant to hear. Clicking insects the size of house cats, their mandibles creating an eerie percussion that never stopped. The distant warble of hunting birds with too many wings swooping through the canopy, and underneath it all, the perpetual rustle of blue-furred mammals scurrying through branches that creaked under their weight. "You fought well today," she said in accented English, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "The Cathari will remember this defeat for many seasons. Your blade took 7 of their warriors. That's more than most of my people kill in a lifetime." Kevin sheathed his blade and crouched beside the fire, wincing as torn muscles protested every movement. His ribs ached where Cathari claws had found gaps in his improvised armor. 3 months ago, he'd been leading a desperate human defense against the savage Cathari raiders, watching good people die because they didn't know how to fight for their lives. Now he sat across from one of their ancient enemies, this small blue woman who called herself Zara. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humanity's greatest hope for survival might lie with creatures they'd initially mistaken for children playing dress-up in war paint. "Your people tried to kill mine when we first crashed," Kevin said, stirring the coals with a charred stick. The embers cast dancing shadows on his weathered face, highlighting scars earned in countless skirmishes since the New Horizon went down. "3 of your warriors put spears through Dr. Patterson's chest on our second day here. Why should I trust you now?" Zara's expression darkened, her delicate features hardening with old pain and fresh regret. "Because my people are not the Cathari, and because we were afraid. The Alari have suffered under their claws for generations beyond counting. When you humans arrived in fire and thunder, we thought you were their allies. Another predator species come to feast on our weakness." She paused, her amber eyes distant with memory. "I was there that day. I saw Dr. Patterson die, and I saw you weep over his body even as Cathari howls grew closer. No predator mourns its prey's companions. That's when I knew we had made a terrible mistake." The first human colony ship, the New Horizon, had crashed on Zarian Prime 8 months ago during what should have been a routine atmospheric entry. Solar flares from the system's unstable primary star had knocked out their navigation systems at the worst possible moment, sending 3,000 settlers plummeting through alien skies toward an uncharted world. Of those who dreamed of building a new life among the stars, barely 400 survived the impact in the ship's reinforced passenger sections. Kevin remembered Sarah's hand going limp in his as the ship tore itself apart around them. His wife of 15 years reduced to just another casualty statistic in humanity's failed attempt to find a new home. Her last words had been about the garden she'd planned to plant. Earth roses growing in alien soil under foreign stars. What followed the crash was worse than the impact itself. The Cathari, 7-foot-tall predators with razor claws, pack intelligence, and an insatiable hunger for fresh meat, had found the crash site within days of the disaster. Kevin remembered that first night of horror with crystalline clarity that would probably haunt him until his dying day. The screaming of children torn from their parents' arms before those same parents died trying to protect them. The blood soaking into alien soil that drank it up like it was starved for human life. The way his military training had kicked in as civilians died around him, transforming a broken ex-soldier into humanity's last desperate hope for survival. He'd been retired for 5 years working as a security consultant on civilian transports. The colony ship was supposed to be his fresh start, a chance to build something new with Sarah, maybe even start the family they'd always talked about, but never quite managed. Instead, it became a nightmare where his old skills were the only thing standing between the survivors and total extinction. Kevin had rallied the survivors that first terrible week, organizing defenses from wreckage and debris while the dead were still being pulled from the ruins. Taught farmers and shopkeepers to fight with makeshift spears, crafted from landing strut supports and salvaged metal blades torn from the ship's hull. Showed them how to move quietly through the alien forest, how to set traps that could kill creatures twice their size, how to kill efficiently and without mercy. Because mercy, he'd learned quickly, was a luxury they couldn't afford on Zarian Prime. "The tribal council has decided," Zara continued, her small hands clasped before her in a gesture that Kevin had learned meant respect among her people. Even seated, Kevin towered over her. She barely reached his chest when standing, her small frame making her seem almost childlike, until you looked into her eyes and saw the steel underneath. You have proven your strength, your courage in battle. You protected the weak, fought the strong, showed mercy to defeated enemies when you could have finished them. The old laws are clear about such demonstrations. What law? Kevin asked, though part of him already suspected where this conversation was heading. The Aleri had strange customs, rituals that seemed to govern every aspect of their society, from how they hunted to how they buried their dead. When a warrior of another species demonstrates the 5 sacred virtues, courage in the face of certain death, strength to protect others weaker than themselves, wisdom in choosing which battles to fight, mercy toward the defeated when victory is assured, and honor in keeping promises even when it costs them dearly, they may be granted a life bond with one of our people. Zara's blue cheeks flushed darker, almost purple in the firelight. I am that bond. I am yours if you'll accept the offer freely given. Kevin stared at her, memories of another life flooding back unbidden. Sarah laughing at his terrible cooking. Sarah singing off-key in the shower. Sarah crying when the pregnancy test came back negative for the 3rd time. Sarah's eyes going wide with wonder as the colony ship approached Zarian Prime's orbit, talking excitedly about the future they'd build together. I'm not looking for a slave or a pet, Kevin said finally, his voice rougher than he intended. Not a slave, Zara said quickly, her voice firm with conviction. A partner. A companion in all things, in battle, in peace, in joy, in sorrow. In your language, the closest word would be wife. The word hung between them like smoke from the dying fire. Kevin had lost his real wife in the colony ship crash. Sarah, who'd loved to garden and sing off-key in the shower, who dreamed of planting earth roses in alien soil under foreign stars. The grief still cut deep, a wound that hadn't properly healed despite the months of fighting for survival. But something about this small alien woman stirred feelings he'd thought dead and buried with Sarah's body in the ship's makeshift cemetery. A howl echoed through the forest, long and mournful, like the cry of some ancient god in pain. Then another, closer this time, answered by a third from a different direction entirely. Kevin was on his feet instantly, sword sliding from its makeshift scabbard with a whisper of steel on leather. The blade was notched from months of use, its edge maintained through careful grinding against the ship's metal hull. Zara grabbed her bone spear, a weapon she'd crafted herself from the leg bone of some massive forest creature. Its tip hardened in fire and sharpened to a needle point that could punch through Cathari hide. Her movements were fluid and practiced, without wasted motion or hesitation. Cathari hunting pack, she whispered, her amber eyes scanning the tree line with predatory intensity. They've found our trail at last. I was hoping the rain would wash away our scent. The howls grew closer, forming a rough circle around their small camp. Kevin counted at least 6 distinct voices, maybe more. It was hard to tell with the way sound echoed strangely through the alien forest. He'd fought them before, learned their tactics through bitter experience. They were fast as striking snakes, vicious as rabid wolves, and disturbingly intelligent for creatures that fought with claws and crude weapons. Too intelligent. They'd learned to use tools, coordinate complex attacks involving multiple packs, even set traps of their own. Every encounter taught them something new about human tactics and weaknesses. The river, Zara said urgently, already moving to gather essential supplies, her water skin, a small pouch of preserved food, the bone knife she kept as a backup weapon. If we reach the crossing stones, they won't follow. They fear the deep water spirits that dwell beneath the surface. Kevin didn't believe in spirits, but he'd learned to trust Zara's knowledge of this hostile world. Her people had survived here for generations, while humanity couldn't last a week without constant vigilance. They abandoned the camp without a backward glance, moving swiftly through the undergrowth while the sounds of pursuit grew louder behind them. The forest floor was treacherous in the dim starlight, filtering through the alien canopy. Thorned vines grabbed at their legs with almost malicious intent, their barbs designed by evolution to snare prey for the carnivorous plants they fed. Strange blue-furred creatures skittered through the branches overhead, chattering warnings in their incomprehensible language, while their eyes glowed like tiny stars in the darkness. Bioluminescent flowers provided patches of eerie light that helped with navigation, but also attracted swarms of biting insects that seemed to view human blood as a rare delicacy. Kevin's exposed skin was covered with welts from their attention, each bite burning with an alien toxin that made his nerve endings scream. Behind them, the first Cathari burst into their abandoned clearing, its muzzle lifted to catch their scent. The creature was massive, 8 feet of corded muscle covered in dark fur, marked with ritual scars that told the story of successful hunts. Intelligence gleamed in its yellow eyes as it examined their abandoned camp, reading the signs they'd left behind, like a book written in scent in disturbed earth. Kevin felt like he was running through an alien nightmare, where every shadow could hide death and every sound might be his last warning. But Zara moved with fluid grace beside him, guiding him around pitfalls and hanging branches, with the confidence of someone who'd spent her entire life in these woods. Her small size was an advantage here. She could slip through gaps that would trap a larger pursuer, duck under branches that would clothesline a human. They reached the river as the first pale moon crested the horizon, joining its 2 smaller companions in casting shifting silver light across the landscape. The water rushed black and silver between moss-covered stones, each one worn smooth by centuries of current. Strange fish with too many fins darted through the shallows, their scales glinting like scattered coins, while predatory shadows moved in the deeper pools. Zara leaped onto the first stone with the confidence of someone who'd made this crossing 100 times. Kevin followed more carefully, his heavier frame making the stones shift under his boots. The current was stronger than it looked. One wrong step would send him tumbling into water that looked deep enough to drown in, assuming the things living in its depths didn't get him first. Halfway across, the Cathari broke from the tree line in a coordinated rush that spoke of pack intelligence and careful planning. They were magnificent and terrible, muscled like bears but lithe like cats, their dark fur marked with ritual scars that told stories of hunts and battles. Their pack leader, a massive male with silver-tipped ears and scars crisscrossing his muzzle like a roadmap of violence, snarled at the water's edge but made no move to enter. The others paced restlessly behind him, yellow eyes fixed on their escaping prey with obvious frustration. Kevin could read the intelligence in their postures, the way they tested the water's edge with cautious pause before retreating. Whatever lived in the river's depths, even the Cathari feared it. "The spirits protect us tonight," Zara said softly, but Kevin could hear the tension in her voice. Kevin wasn't so sure about spirits, but something was definitely keeping the Cathari at bay. The pack leader's intelligent eyes tracked their movement across the stones with obvious calculation. This wasn't over. Kevin could read that much in the creature's body language. They'd find another way across, or wait for their prey to return. Cathari were patient hunters when they needed to be, willing to track quarry for days if the potential reward was worth it. They reached the far bank as storm clouds gathered overhead, pregnant with the promise of rain. The air tasted of electricity and something else, a metallic tang that made Kevin's teeth ache and his skin prickle with static. Zara led him to a cave hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines, their broad leaves rustling in the rising wind like whispered warnings. Inside, the cave was larger than it appeared from outside, extending back into the hillside with multiple chambers and passages. Ancient pictographs covered the walls, blue-skinned figures hunting alongside others with pale skin. The artwork was primitive, but detailed, showing scenes of cooperation and shared victory that spoke of old alliances. Humans, Kevin realized with a start that made his heart skip a beat. His people had been here before. "My people have met yours before," Zara explained, seeing his expression change as he studied the ancient paintings. "Long ago, before the great burning in the sky that my grandmother's grandmother spoke of in her stories. Some humans stayed and made lives here, alongside the Alari. Some left to seek other worlds among the stars. The stories say they'll return when the world needs them most." Kevin moved closer to the pictographs, studying the details with growing amazement. The human figures were clearly recognizable despite the primitive art style. Their proportions, their tools, even their clothing looked familiar. And you think that's now? Thunder rolled across the sky like the voice of an angry god preparing for war. The Cathari grow stronger each season, learning from every encounter with your people. They've learned to work metal, stolen from the wreckage of your ship. They coordinate attacks across vast distances using horn calls and scent markers that carry for miles. Soon they'll overwhelm all the peaceful tribes in this region. She paused, her expression troubled by visions of a dark future. Without your people's fighting spirit, without the old alliance renewed and strengthened, all will fall to their claws within a generation. She didn't finish the thought, but Kevin understood with grim clarity. The human colony was failing by degrees, worn down by constant attrition. Disease, starvation, and constant Cathari raids had reduced their numbers to less than 200. Dr. Williams estimated they had perhaps 6 months before malnutrition and despair finished what the predators had started. In another year, maybe less, they'd all be dead or scattered to the winds like autumn leaves. Rain began pattering on the cave entrance, each drop the size of a marble and hitting with enough force to sting exposed skin. Zara gathered dried moss for a small fire, her movements graceful and efficient despite the growing urgency of their situation. In the firelight, her blue skin seemed to glow softly from within, and Kevin noticed details he'd missed before during their desperate flight. Her features were delicate but strong, with high cheekbones that spoke of noble bloodlines, and large eyes that missed nothing in their surroundings. Intricate tattoos covered her arms, not decorative, but functional markings that told her history, her accomplishments, her place in Alari society. Each symbol had meaning, recording deeds and honors earned through courage and skill. "Tell me about the life bond," Kevin said as she coaxed flames from the tinder with practiced efficiency. Zara paused in her fire-making, considering her words carefully. "It's old magic. Not the kind that shoots lightning or moves mountains. We have no such powers, contrary to what some of your people believe. The kind that lives in the heart, in the spaces between souls where true understanding dwells. When two spirits join willingly and completely, they share strength, courage, even fortune in battle. I'll know your thoughts before you speak them. You'll feel my presence even when we're separated by vast distances." "Sounds like fairy tales," Kevin said, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd seen too much on this world to dismiss anything as impossible. "Your people have them too. Soulmates, true love, destiny written in the stars." She looked at him directly, her amber eyes reflecting the dancing flames with hypnotic intensity. "The words are different, but the meaning is the same across all worlds and species. I felt it the first time I saw you fight. The way you protected the human children even when outnumbered 3-1. The way you spared the wounded Cathari instead of finishing them when they could no longer fight back. You have the heart my people honor above all other virtues." The fire crackled to life, casting warm light across the ancient pictographs and driving back the shadows that seemed to press in from all sides. Outside, the storm grew fiercer, wind howling through the hanging vines like the voices of the dead calling for vengeance. Kevin thought of Sarah, of the promise he'd made at her grave marker, a simple cross carved from ship's metal and decorated with her favorite flowers, preserved from Earth in the colony ship's botanical section. He'd sworn to survive, to protect the other colonists, to build something worthy of her memory and sacrifice. Maybe this strange little alien woman was part of that promise. Maybe Sarah, wherever she was now, would have approved of him finding happiness again, even in such an impossible situation with a creature from another world. "What happens if I say yes?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the storm. "We become one flesh, one spirit, joined in ways that transcend physical form. In joy and in battle, in life and in death, through whatever trials the universe sends against us. The bond cannot be broken by distance or time, or even death itself. The stories say bonded pairs find each other in whatever comes after this life." Zara's voice grew solemn, almost ritualistic in its cadence. "There's no ceremony, no priest needed. Just words spoken freely under the open sky, with the spirits of both our peoples as witnesses to the vow. And if I say no, I return to my people with honor intact and no shame upon either of us. You return to yours. We remain friends and allies, but nothing more. The choice is yours alone. It cannot be made from duty or desperation or fear, only from genuine desire for union." Kevin studied her face in the firelight, memorizing every detail while the storm raged outside their sanctuary. 3 months of fighting alongside Zara had shown him her courage, her loyalty, her fierce protective instincts toward anything she considered under her protection. She'd saved his life twice, once from a Cathari ambush that should have killed him, once from a poisonous plant he'd nearly eaten in his ignorance of this world's dangers. He'd returned the favor, and they'd developed the kind of trust that only came from shared mortal danger. The kind of bond that let you sleep peacefully knowing someone was watching your back, that made you fight harder because failure meant losing someone who mattered. Maybe that was enough foundation for something deeper. Maybe love could grow from respect and shared purpose, the way plants grew from good soil given enough time and care. "Ask me again when the storm passes," he said finally. Zara nodded and settled beside the fire, apparently content to wait. They shared dried meat and water from her supplies in comfortable silence, listening to the rain drum against stone with increasing fury. The food was alien but nourishing, some kind of preserved fruit that tasted like a cross between berries and nuts, strips of meat from creatures Kevin couldn't identify but had learned to appreciate. "Tell me about your wife," Zara said suddenly, her voice gentle but curious. "The one who died in the ship." Kevin tensed, old pain flaring like a reopened wound. "Why?" "Because she was part of you, and if we're to be bonded, I should know all of you, the joy and the sorrow together." Kevin was quiet for a long moment, watching flames dance among the carefully arranged fuel. "Her name was Sarah. We were married 15 years, but we never had children. She always said we'd start trying next year when things were more settled." He laughed bitterly. 15 years of next year? She sounds like she was cautious. "She was perfect," Kevin said fiercely, then caught himself. "I'm sorry. That's not fair to you. Don't apologize for loving her. Love doesn't diminish when shared. It grows stronger." Zara's voice was warm with understanding. "Tell me what made her special." So Kevin did, finding himself talking about Sarah for the first time since her death, her terrible cooking that she insisted on attempting anyway, her habit of humming while she worked, the way she could make him laugh even when everything seemed hopeless, the dreams they'd shared of finding a new world where they could finally start the family they'd always wanted. "She would have liked you," he said finally. "She always said I needed someone who could keep up with me in a fight." Zara smiled. "I would have liked to meet her." Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both. Kevin had learned to sleep light in this hostile world, one ear always alert for danger, but tonight something about Zara's presence let him relax completely for the first time in months. If the Cathari found them here, they'd face them together. Kevin woke to sunlight streaming through the cave entrance and the sound of Zara sharpening her spear with smooth, practiced strokes. She'd found fresh fruit somewhere, purple spheres that split open to reveal sweet, translucent flesh, arranging them on broad leaves beside the cold fire pit. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling with moisture. "The pack leader waited all night across the river," she said without looking up from her weapon maintenance. "He's gone now, but his scent lingers on the wind. They'll try again, probably tonight. Cathari are patient when hunting dangerous prey, and we've proven ourselves dangerous." That decided it for Kevin. If they were going to face constant danger, better to face it as true partners, rather than mere allies. He stood and walked to the cave entrance, looking out at the alien forest, bathed in morning light from 3 suns. The large primary star, flanked by 2 smaller companions, cast everything in an otherworldly glow that made the blue-furred creatures in silver-barked trees seem like something from a half-remembered dream. "Zara," he called. She joined him at the entrance, her amber eyes questioning but hopeful. This close, he could smell her scent. Something like cinnamon and rain, utterly unlike any human woman, but somehow right. "Ask me," he said simply. Her face lit up with surprise and joy, transforming her from seasoned warrior to young woman in an instant. She took his hands in hers, so small and delicate, but calloused from spear work and survival in this hostile world. "Kevin of the humans, warrior and protector of the weak, will you accept the life bond with me?" Her voice carried the weight of ancient ritual passed down through generations. "Will you share your strength with mine, your courage with mine, your destiny with mine until the end of all things?" The words felt right, ancient and powerful in a way that transcended language barriers and species differences. "I will." "Then speak the binding words as your heart knows them to be true, 2 souls, 1 heart, until the stars grow cold and dark." 2 souls, 1 heart, until the stars grow cold and dark. Something shifted in the air between them, like electricity before lightning strikes or the moment before earthquake tremors begin. Zara's eyes widened in wonder, and Kevin felt a strange tingling in his chest, as if his heartbeat had synchronized with something larger than himself. For a moment, he could swear he felt her emotions as clearly as his own. Joy, relief, a deep well of affection that went far beyond mere attraction. And underneath it all, a sense of completion, as if some missing piece of himself had finally clicked into place. "It's done," Zara whispered, her voice full of awe. "The bond is sealed. We are one spirit in two bodies." Before Kevin could respond, shouts echoed from the forest beyond the river. Human voices raised in alarm and fear. His colonists were in trouble, and trouble on Zarion Prime usually meant only one thing. They ran through the trees, Zara matching his pace with supernatural ease. The life bond hummed between them like a vibrating wire. Kevin could feel her thoughts, her absolute determination to protect his people, even though they were essentially strangers to her. When they reached the colony clearing, chaos reigned supreme. Cathari warriors surrounded the central compound like a living wall of fur and fangs, their numbers greater than any force Kevin had seen before. Not a simple hunting pack this time, but a full war party. 30 or more fighters armed with crude metal weapons salvaged from the crash site. They'd learned too much from watching human tactics, adapted too quickly to the colonists' defensive strategies. The compound itself was a fortress built from desperation and salvaged materials. Walls of welded ship plates, watchtowers made from landing gear struts, gates that could seal tight against assault. But the Cathari had learned about siege warfare through bitter experience. They'd constructed crude ladders from forest wood, battering rams wrapped in hide for protection, even primitive catapults that hurled burning bundles over the walls. "The children," Zara gasped, pointing toward the central courtyard with horror in her voice. Kevin saw them too. 24 human kids huddled in the center of the compound, while the adults formed a desperate circle around them. His fellow colonists fought bravely with whatever weapons they could find, but they were outnumbered and increasingly desperate. Dr. Williams clutched a surgical laser that doubled as a weapon, its battery probably running low. Rebecca Martinez swung a wrench like a club, her movements clumsy but determined. These were farmers and engineers and teachers, not soldiers. They were dying by inches and everyone could see it. Kevin watched in horror as a Cathari warrior broke through the defensive line, its claws reaching for 8-year-old Tommy Chen. The boy's scream cut through the air like a blade, and something inside Kevin snapped with audible force. "Can your people help?" he asked Zara, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it. "Too far away. Even if I sent signals now, they couldn't arrive before the battle ends." Zara hefted her spear, testing its balance with practiced efficiency. "It's just us. Just them against 30 savage predators armed with metal weapons and bitter experience." Kevin hefted his sword and smiled grimly, feeling the life bond pulse between them with shared determination. The odds were terrible, but he'd faced worse. And now he had something he'd never had before, a partner who could read his mind. "Then let's even the odds," he said. They charged from the tree line like vengeance given form. Kevin bellowed a war cry that made half the Cathari turn in confusion, their pack discipline wavering for just a moment. That moment was all Zara needed. Her spear flew true, taking down the nearest warrior before he could react to their sudden appearance. The battle became a blur of blood and steel and desperate fury. Kevin fought with the skill earned through months of constant warfare, his blade cutting through Cathari claws and crude armor with savage efficiency. But it was different now, fighting beside Zara. The life bond made them perfect partners. When Kevin was overwhelmed on his left, Zara was there without being asked. When she stumbled on blood-slick ground, his hand caught her before she could fall. They moved like they'd fought together for years instead of hours, each anticipating the other's moves with uncanny precision. Kevin would begin a swing, and Zara would already be positioning herself to exploit the opening it would create. She would duck a Cathari's wild swing, and Kevin would be there to finish the creature before it could recover. But there were too many enemies, and the colonists were still trapped behind their makeshift walls. A Cathari claw raked across Kevin's ribs, drawing blood and making him stagger. The wound burned with alien toxins, and he felt his strength beginning to flag. Another pack warrior flanked Zara, forcing her to retreat toward the compound walls. Her spear shaft cracked under the impact of a Cathari club, and Kevin saw fear flash across her face for the first time since he'd known her. The defenders inside were faltering, their makeshift weapons breaking against superior numbers and natural weapons. Dr. Williams went down with claw marks across his chest, his medical training useless against predators who showed no mercy. Then the forest exploded with new war cries that seemed to shake the very ground. Ellery warriors poured from the trees like blue-skinned ghosts given substance. Dozens of them, small and quick, and absolutely fearless. They moved with coordinated precision that made the Kethari pack tactics look clumsy, their bone weapons finding gaps in enemy armor with surgical accuracy. "My people," Zara explained breathlessly, parrying a Kethari claw with her broken spear. They felt the life bond form across the distance. In our culture, such an event calls for immediate celebration and protection. The tide turned in moments. Caught between human determination, Ilari skill, and their own confusion at facing coordinated resistance, the Cathari war party began to crumble. Those who could broke and fled back into the forest, their howls of retreat echoing through the trees. The rest lay still among the fallen leaves, their blood seeping into alien soil. Kevin slumped against the compound wall, exhaustion hitting him like a physical blow. Around the settlement, humans and Ilari worked together to treat the wounded, their cooperation natural despite the language barriers. Children who'd never seen aliens before offered water to blue-skinned warriors with the innocent trust of the very young. Old fears were crumbling in the face of shared sacrifice and common purpose. Zara's people approached their new leader, for that's what Kevin had become, he realized with some surprise. The Ilari treated him with deep respect, bowing slightly as they would to their own war chiefs. Their leader, an elderly female with intricate silver tattoos covering her arms, spoke in their musical language. The conversation was lengthy and formal, with several other Ilari joining in. Kevin caught fragments, words about alliance, shared territories, combined strength against common enemies. The elderly leader seemed particularly interested in human technology and fighting techniques. "She wants to know your intentions for the future," Zara translated, her hand finding his and squeezing gently. "My people don't form life bonds lightly. By accepting me, you've essentially married into our entire tribe. Your family now, with all the responsibilities that entails. Tell her we want to survive, to build something better than what we left behind on Earth, something that can thrive instead of just endure." "They offer a formal pact," Zara said finally, her amber eyes bright with hope. "Human knowledge and fighting spirit, Ellerai wisdom and numbers. Together we can drive the Cathari from this entire region and build settlements that can thrive instead of merely surviving day to day." Kevin looked around the compound. His people, tired, scared, but still alive. Still hoping for something better than constant fear and slow starvation. The Ilari had proven themselves valuable allies, and their offer seemed genuine. "Tell them yes," he said without hesitation. The celebration that night was unlike anything Kevin had ever experienced. Humans and Ilari shared food, stories, even crude songs in broken translations of each other's languages. Children from both species played games that needed no words. Tag and hide and seek seemed to be universal concepts that transcended species barriers. Warriors compared scars and techniques, learning from each other despite the language barriers. Kevin watched Dr. Williams, his wounds bandaged but his spirit intact, deep in conversation with an Ilari healer, both of them sketching anatomical diagrams in the dirt to overcome communication problems. Kevin found himself sitting beside the fire with Zara curled against his side, her small frame fitting perfectly under his arm. She was so tiny that she barely reached his shoulder when standing, but her presence felt larger than life. The life bond hummed between them constantly now, carrying emotions and half-formed thoughts back and forth like whispered conversations. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the celebration around them. The bond. Number. Kevin tightened his arm around her, breathing in her strange but pleasant scent. "But I'm still figuring out what it means for both of us. It means you're not alone anymore. None of us are." She gestured toward the mixed celebration surrounding them. "Look at them. Humans teaching Ilari children to play catch with a ball made from ship's insulation. Ilari hunters showing your people which plants are safe to eat, which ones will kill you if you're not careful. Two species, so different in appearance, but alike in the things that really matter." Kevin watched a group of human teenagers attempting to learn an Ilari dance, while their blue-skinned teachers laughed at their clumsy efforts with good-natured humor. Across the compound, Rebecca Martinez was trading engineering knowledge with an Ilari craftsman, both of them fascinated by each other's techniques. The Cathari will return, Zara said, her mood growing more serious as the implications of their new alliance sank in. In greater numbers, with better weapons stolen from your ship. They won't tolerate this alliance. They see it as an existential threat to their way of life. Let them come. Kevin's hand found the hilt of his sword automatically. We'll be ready for them. But privately, he wondered if they would be ready. The Cathari were learning too quickly, adapting too well to human tactics and technology. Each encounter taught them something new about weapons, strategy, even basic engineering principles. How long before they developed effective countermeasures to everything the Allied forces could throw at them? The next morning brought scouts with grim news that confirmed Kevin's worst fears. Cathari clans were gathering in the deep forest, more than anyone had seen in living memory. The survivors of yesterday's raid had spread word of the Human-Alari alliance, and the predator species saw it as exactly what Zara had predicted, an existential threat to their dominance. 3 days, reported an Alari scout whose name Kevin couldn't pronounce, but whose scars spoke of many battles survived. Maybe 4 if the clan leaders argue among themselves about battle tactics. Then they attack with everything they have. Kevin stood in the center of the compound, looking at the mixed group of humans and Alari around him. 200 humans, maybe 300 Alari, against thousands of savage predators who'd had months to study their tactics and weaknesses. We can't win a siege here, he said bluntly, his military experience cutting through any comforting illusions. Too many of them, not enough defensive positions. They'll overwhelm us through sheer numbers, and we'll all die for nothing. Then we don't fight here, said an Alari war chief named Kef, whose scars told the story of dozens of battles. We make them come to us where we choose the ground and the terms of engagement. Zara nodded agreement. The Thornwall Canyons. Narrow passes, limited approaches, natural choke points that favor defenders. A small force could hold them indefinitely if properly positioned. What about supplies? Water for this many people? Underground springs fed by mountain snowmelt. Cached food stores from my people's old settlements, hidden in places the Cathari have never found. Zara touched his arm, and through the life bond he felt her absolute confidence in the plan. It's our best chance, maybe our only chance of survival. The evacuation began immediately. Non-combatants headed for the canyons in small groups, taking different routes through the forest to avoid detection. Kevin supervised the retreat personally, making sure the most vulnerable, children, elderly, wounded, reached safety first. The Alari proved invaluable guides, knowing paths through the forest that even the Cathari couldn't track. Hidden trails that wound through thornwood groves where the thorns themselves would slow pursuit. Stream beds that masked scent trails. Cave systems that provided emergency shelter if they were discovered. Behind them, they left a ghost town. The compound stood empty, its walls scarred by battle but still intact. Kevin felt a pang of loss looking back at humanity's first settlement on Zarian Prime. Whatever happened in the canyons, they probably wouldn't be coming back here. The journey to the Thornwall Canyons took 2 days of hard travel. They moved mostly at night, when the alien predators were less active, and their passage would be harder to detect. Kevin learned more about Zarian Prime's deadly ecosystem during those 2 days than in all his previous months of survival. The world was trying to kill them in 100 different ways. Plants that released toxic spores when disturbed, insects whose bites carried paralytic venom, seemingly solid ground that could collapse into sinkholes filled with creatures that fed on trapped prey. But Zara and her people navigated these hazards with the confidence of those born to this world. They knew which plants to avoid, which sounds meant danger, which paths were safe and which led to certain death. The Thornwall Canyons were a natural fortress carved from red stone by millions of years of wind and water. Narrow defiles led to a central valley with abundant water and sheltered alcoves for the refugees. The Alari had used this place before during their own wars with the Cathari, and the evidence was everywhere. Old weapon caches hidden in sealed caves, defensive positions carved into the rock faces, even primitive artworks depicting ancient battles. Kevin positioned fighters at the 3 main passes, mixing human aggression with Alari tactics. Spears and swords for close combat, crossbows and slings for ranged work. Not sophisticated weapons, but deadly in the right hands and properly coordinated. The waiting was the hardest part. Knowing the enemy was coming, knowing they outnumbered the defenders 10 to 1, but not knowing exactly when or where they'd strike first. Kevin used the time to drill mixed units of humans and Alari, teaching them to fight as integrated teams rather than separate forces. The cultural differences were challenging. Humans tended toward individual heroics and aggressive tactics. Alari preferred coordinated group efforts and defensive strategies. But the life bond network that was spreading through the Allied forces helped bridge those gaps, creating understanding where language barriers might have failed. On the second night, the Cathari found them. The attack came at dawn, just as Kevin had expected based on their previous tactics. Wave after wave of howling predators threw themselves at the narrow passes with suicidal fury, testing the defenses and probing for weaknesses. The defenders held, but barely. Each assault cost them blood and weapons they couldn't afford to lose. Kevin fought in the northern pass, his sword work keeping 3 Cathari warriors at bay, while Alari spears darted around him like striking snakes. The life bond let him feel Zara's position without looking. She was 50 yards away in the eastern pass, leading a mixed unit of human teenagers and Alari hunters against a coordinated Cathari push. Through their connection, he could sense her growing exhaustion and the steady attrition of her forces. "They're testing us," Zara said during a brief lull, binding a gash on Kevin's sword arm with strips torn from her own clothing. "Learning our defenses, finding weak points they can exploit in the real assault." Kevin nodded grimly. "How long before they figure out how to break through?" "Not long, they're learning too fast." The real attack came on the third day, with a coordination that spoke of intelligence and planning. Coordinated assaults on all 3 passes, plus climbing teams scaling the canyon walls with crude rope and grappling hooks. The Cathari had learned human siege tactics and adapted them to their own physical advantages. Kevin found himself fighting for his life in a chaos of steel and claws that seemed to go on forever. A massive Cathari chief burst through the defensive line, his metal weapons gleaming with stolen human craftsmanship. The creature was a giant among its kind, standing nearly 9 feet tall and covered in scars that told of countless victories. Kevin met his charge head-on, their weapons ringing against each other with bone-jarring impacts that sent shockwaves up his arms. The alien was stronger and faster, but Kevin was more experienced and desperate. They traded blows for what felt like hours, Kevin's arms aching from blocking the chief's powerful swings. Blood ran down his face from shallow claw rakes, and his breath came in ragged gasps. The wound in his ribs had reopened, seeping blood through his makeshift bandages. But gradually the chief's movement slowed as well. Blood loss and exhaustion were taking their toll on both fighters. Kevin finally found his opening when the Cathari overextended on a wild swing meant to decapitate him. His blade slipped between the creature's ribs with surgical precision, finding the heart and ending the fight in a spray of alien blood. The chief toppled backward with a crash that seemed to shake the narrow pass. The other Cathari saw their leader fall and wavered for just a moment, long enough for human and Alari fighters to press forward with renewed fury, driving the invaders back toward the canyon mouth. But more were coming. The canyon walls echoed with howls and war cries from dozens of throats. This was just the first wave of what promised to be an endless assault. "We can't hold much longer," Kef reported during another brief lull. Half his warriors were down, and ammunition for the crossbows was running dangerously low. Too many wounded, too few weapons left intact. Kevin looked around the defensive positions with growing despair. Half their fighters were down, their makeshift weapons broken or lost. The Cathari seemed to have unlimited reinforcements, and each wave was more coordinated than the last. In the Central Valley, children huddled together while their parents prepared for the worst. Dr. Williams was doing what he could for the wounded, but his medical supplies were nearly exhausted. "There's another way," Zara said quietly, appearing at his side with her spear bloody, but her amber eyes still bright with determination. "What way?" "The old paths. My grandmother told stories passed down through generations, tunnels through the bedrock, carved by the first Alari who settled this region. They lead to the sacred grove." "Where's that?" "A day's travel north through the underground passages, hidden valley protected by the ancestor spirits and natural barriers that even the Cathari fear." Zara's expression was troubled. "But the tunnels haven't been used in generations. They might have collapsed or filled with water, or worse things that hunt in the dark places under the world." It wasn't much of a choice. Stay and die fighting against impossible odds, or risk the unknown dangers of abandoned tunnels that might not even exist anymore. Kevin gathered the surviving leaders, human and Alari alike, for a quick conference. "We're pulling back," he announced. "All of us. Fighting retreat to the center valley, then into the old tunnels if we can find them. You're abandoning the passes, Dr. Williams protested, clutching a medical kit that doubled as his weapon. Those positions are the only thing keeping them from overrunning us completely. I'm saving lives, Kevin replied firmly. We've bloodied them enough to earn respect. Time to disappear and regroup somewhere they can't follow. The retreat was controlled chaos. Wounded fighters leaned on their comrades while non-combatants gathered essential supplies with desperate efficiency. The Alari led them to a concealed entrance in the valley's rear wall, a crack in the stone barely wide enough for one person at a time. As the first refugees entered the tunnels, Cathari war cries echoed from the passes. They'd broken through at last but found only empty stone and cold ashes from abandoned campfires. The tunnels were a nightmare of twisting passages and blind turns that seemed designed to confuse and disorient intruders. Ancient Alari pictographs marked the walls at irregular intervals, but many were faded beyond recognition by centuries of moisture and neglect. Some passages ended in cave-ins that forced the group to backtrack and find alternate routes through the labyrinthine network. Others opened onto underground chasms that seemed to drop into the world's very heart. Kevin stayed at the rear with a handful of volunteers, making sure no one was left behind and watching for pursuit. The Cathari were excellent trackers, but even they might have trouble following a scent trail through solid rock. The life bond carried Zara's thoughts from the front of the column, her growing worry about wrong turns, and the very real possibility that they were lost in the depths of the world, wandering in circles while their enemies regrouped above. Hours passed in the suffocating darkness, broken only by the faint glow of bioluminescent fungi that grew in scattered patches along the tunnel walls. The air was thick and humid, carrying strange smells that spoke of underground rivers and deep places that had never seen sunlight. Children whimpered in the darkness, their fear adding to the oppressive atmosphere. The wounded groaned with each step, their injuries aggravated by the rough travel. Several times the column had to stop while someone collapsed from exhaustion or blood loss. Then they heard it, the sound of running water echoing through the stone like a promise of salvation. Following the sound led them to an underground river, and beyond that, natural stairs carved from living rock. Ellery work, but older than anything Kevin had seen before. The craftsmanship was exquisite despite its age. Each step perfectly proportioned, the handholds worn smooth by countless generations of use. Symbols were carved into the walls here too, but these were different, more elaborate, telling stories of great deeds and ancient wisdom. They climbed for hours in the dark, guided by the sound of wind from above and the gradually freshening air. When they finally emerged, dawn was breaking over a hidden valley that looked like something from an impossible dream. Ancient trees with silver bark reached toward the sky, their leaves chiming softly in the morning breeze like natural wind chimes. Blue grass grew in perfect circles around clear springs that bubbled up from hidden sources. Strange flowers that glowed with their own inner light swayed without any wind to move them, their radiance painting everything in soft, ethereal colors. The entire valley hummed with life and peace in a way that made Kevin's battle-hardened nerves slowly relax for the first time in days. This place felt safe in a way that transcended physical barriers, as if the very air itself rejected violence and hatred. The sacred grove, Zara breathed, her voice full of wonder. I thought it was just a legend, stories told to children to teach them about the old ways. Curry. The refugees spread out through the valley like water finding its level, instinctively seeking shelter under the great trees and fresh water in the singing springs. Children laughed for the first time in days, splashing in shallow pools while their parents set up makeshift camps with materials salvaged from their journey. But Kevin couldn't shake his soldiers' paranoia. The valley felt safe, protected somehow by forces he didn't understand. But the Cathari were still out there. Eventually, they'd find this place too. They were too intelligent and too persistent to give up now. Not necessarily, said an aged Alari female, who'd appeared beside him without making a sound. Her skin was the pale blue of deep ice, and her eyes held depths like starlight. Ancient tattoos covered every inch of exposed skin, telling stories in a visual language Kevin couldn't begin to interpret. Who are you? He asked, instinctively moving to protect Zara, despite not sensing any threat from the newcomer. A guardian, a keeper of old promises and older truths. She gestured toward the mixed camp of humans and Alari with one gnarled hand. Your people came here once before, child. In the time of my grandmother's grandmother, when the first ships fell from the sky like burning stars. Zara looked as confused as Kevin felt. I don't understand. The stories speak of ancient contact, but nothing this specific. Stories change in the telling, becoming legend and myth as the generations pass, the Guardian said with a slight smile. But some of us remember the truth. Your ancestors made pacts with us then, sealed in blood and starfire under these very trees. She led them deeper into the valley's heart, where a circle of standing stones surrounded a pool of perfectly still water. Each stone was covered with symbols Kevin recognized. Human figures and Alari working together, fighting side by side, building something greater than either species could achieve alone. The life bond you share, it's not new magic, the Guardian continued. It's the oldest magic, the first alliance between your kinds. When the Ellery chose to link their destiny with humanity's, we became more than either species alone could ever be. She gestured toward the still pool. Look into the water, children. See what was, and what might be again. Kevin knelt beside the pool with Zara at his side. The surface rippled without any wind to disturb it, and suddenly he was seeing visions. Human ships landing on Zarian Prime centuries ago, peaceful first contact with the Alari, joint colonies that thrived for generations before something went terribly wrong. War, Zara whispered, watching the same images with growing understanding. Plague, ships leaving, abandoning the world to savage species like the Cathari. Some humans stayed, the Guardian confirmed. They intermarried with my people, their bloodlines mixing until the distinction became meaningless. The potential for life bonds exists in both species now, waiting for the right circumstances to awaken it. The water showed them more. Possible futures where humans and Alari spread across the stars together, their combined strengths making them unstoppable. Worlds reclaimed from savage species, peace between a dozen alien races, children who were the best of both heritages carrying their parents' dreams to distant suns. But only if you choose it, the Guardian warned, her ancient voice carrying the weight of prophecy. The Cathari mass their forces even now for a final assault. They sense the old powers awakening and fear what they might bring to pass. Kevin stood, his mind racing with possibilities and implications. How many of them? All of them. Every clan, every pack, every warrior who can hold a weapon. They know this is their last chance to destroy the Alliance before it grows too strong to defeat. The implications were staggering. If every Cathari on the continent was marching toward the sacred grove, they were facing not hundreds but thousands of enemies. No defensive position could hold against those numbers. You can stay hidden here, the Guardian continued, safe but ultimately doomed to slow extinction as your numbers dwindle and inbreeding weakens your bloodlines. Or you can emerge and fight for the future you've seen in the sacred waters. Kevin felt Zara's hand slip into his, her thoughts flowing through the life bond with crystal clarity. She was afraid, terrified actually, but also determined. They'd come too far and sacrificed too much to hide now. We fight, he said simply. Then you'll need more than courage and determination. The Guardian led them to a grove of silver trees where weapons lay waiting, swords, spears, and bows of some gleaming metal that wasn't quite steel, but seemed somehow superior. Kevin lifted one of the swords, testing its balance. It was perfectly weighted, lighter than steel, but somehow he knew it was stronger. The blade hummed with restrained power, eager for battle. Gifts from the First Alliance, the Guardian explained. Forged in the early days when your peoples worked together, crafted from metals found only in the deep places of this world. They'll cut through Cathari claws like paper, turn aside their crude weapons like they were made of wood. Within hours, every fighter in the valley was armed with the ancient weapons. The difference was immediately apparent. Even the youngest Alari warriors now stood a real chance against the massive predators. But weapons alone wouldn't be enough against thousands of enemies. They needed strategy, coordination, the kind of tactical thinking that had let small human forces defeat larger enemies throughout history. Kevin gathered the war leaders around the sacred pool, using its visions to scout the approaching Cathari army. The sight was daunting beyond belief. Thousands of warriors converging on the valley from three directions, their crude banners and war totems marking clan allegiances that normally kept them fighting each other. Only shared hatred of the Human-Alari Alliance had united them in common cause. We can't meet them head-on, Kevin said, stating the obvious, but we don't have to fight them where they expect us to. The plan he outlined was audacious to the point of insanity. Small groups of volunteers would leave the valley and establish positions in the surrounding hills and forests. When the Cathari arrived, these forces would harass their flanks and rear, drawing them into scattered pursuits that would break up their coordinated advance. Meanwhile, the main force would wait hidden in the grove itself, ready to strike when the enemy was divided and confused. It required perfect timing and absolute trust between species who'd been strangers just weeks before. But the life bond was spreading throughout the community now, not just between Kevin and Zara, but forming spontaneously between humans and Alari, who'd fought together, protected each other, shared the deepest dangers. The network of connection was turning their mixed force into something like a single organism with many parts but one purpose. The volunteers departed at sunset, vanishing into the wilderness like ghosts carrying the hopes of both species. Kevin watched them go with a heavy heart, knowing some wouldn't return. But their sacrifice might save everyone else, might save the future itself. Zara squeezed his hand, her small fingers intertwining with his larger ones. Through their bond, he felt her absolute confidence in his leadership, her willingness to follow him into any danger. "Two souls, one heart," she murmured. "Until the stars grow cold," he replied. The first Cathari scouts appeared at dawn, prowling the valley's edges like cautious wolves testing unknown territory. They found no defenders, only empty trails and cold ashes from abandoned camps. Emboldened by the apparent lack of resistance, larger groups began descending into the grove. They had no idea they were walking into the most sophisticated ambush in the history of either species. The attack came when the sun reached its zenith, and the Cathari had committed most of their forces to the valley floor. Ancient Alari warriors rose from concealment among the silver trees like vengeful spirits given form, their new weapons gleaming in the dappled light. Human fighters charged from hidden positions, their war cries echoing off the standing stones with primitive fury. Caught completely by surprise, the first wave of Cathari died without landing a single blow. But there were always more, thousands more. The main army poured into the valley like a black tide, howling with rage at the deception they'd walked into. The sacred grove became a battlefield where legends were born and heroes died. Kevin fought at the center of the storm, his ancient sword cutting through Cathari weapons and armor with supernatural ease. Around him, the mixed force of humans and Alari moved with uncanny coordination. The spreading network of life bonds was creating something unprecedented, a telepathic army that anticipated every move and countered every strategy. When one fighter was in trouble, help appeared without being asked. When a position was about to be overrun, reinforcements arrived with perfect timing. But even supernatural coordination had limits. The sheer number of enemies was overwhelming, threatening to crush the defenders through pure attrition. Bodies piled up around the sacred stones, but still the Cathari came in endless waves. Kevin found himself facing 3 Cathari warriors at once, their coordinated attacks pushing him to his absolute limits. His ancient sword sang through the air, parrying claws and crude weapons with desperate skill. Behind him, he could hear Zara fighting her own battle, her spear work keeping another group of enemies at bay. Through the life bond, he felt her growing exhaustion, the small wounds accumulating on her small frame. She was tough for her size, but there was only so much punishment anybody could take. Then salvation arrived from an unexpected direction. The volunteer forces struck from the hills with devastating effect, their arrows and spears raining down on the Cathari rearguard like a sudden storm. The enemy army, so focused on the battle in the grove, suddenly found itself attacked from all sides. Kevin seized the moment with the instincts of a born commander. "Now!" he roared, his voice carrying across the battlefield with supernatural clarity. "All fighters, full assault!" The defenders surged forward with desperate fury that bordered on fanaticism. Ancient weapons met primitive claws in a chaos of steel and blood and primal screams that seemed to shake the very earth. But the tide was turning. Kevin could feel it through the life bond network like electricity in the air. The Cathari, masters of ambush and surprise attack, had never faced an enemy that could coordinate so perfectly across such distances. The enemy army began to break, first in small groups, then in larger formations. The predators fled back toward the valley entrance. Their war chiefs tried to rally them with roars and threats, but fear was spreading faster than courage could counter it. By midday, it was over. The sacred grove was littered with bodies from half a dozen species, but the Cathari army was scattered to the winds. Those who survived would carry word back to their clans. The humans and Alari were not prey anymore. They were apex predators in their own right. Kevin stood in the center of the battlefield, exhausted but victorious. His ancient sword was notched and bloody, his armor torn in a dozen places, but he was alive. Around him, wounded fighters helped each other, while the dead received honors from both species. "It's finished," Zara said, appearing at his side with her spear still dripping. A shallow cut across her forehead had painted half her face blue with her own blood, but she was smiling. "The Great War is finally over." "This war," Kevin corrected gently. "The galaxy is full of species like the Cathari. There will be other battles, other enemies to face. Then we'll face them together." Zara's amber eyes shone with fierce determination. Human and Alari, bound by more than law or treaty, bound by choice, by shared blood, by love itself. Kevin pulled her close, this tiny alien woman who'd become his anchor in a hostile universe. Through their bond, he felt the connection spreading throughout their people. New partnerships forming every day, old barriers dissolving like morning mist. A future taking shape that neither species could have achieved alone. The Guardian appeared beside them as if materializing from the air itself. Her ancient face was creased with satisfaction as she surveyed the mixed celebration beginning around them. "The first alliance has been renewed," she said simply. "The old promises kept. Your children will inherit a galaxy where cooperation conquers fear, where love transcends the boundaries between worlds." She gestured toward the sacred pool, where new visions were forming in the still water. Human Alari settlements on distant worlds, their architecture blending the best of both cultures. Mixed fleets exploring unknown sectors of space, their crews united by bonds stronger than any military discipline. Children with the best traits of both species, carrying their parents' courage and wisdom to distant stars. "But that's tomorrow's story," the Guardian said with a smile that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. "Today, rest. Heal your wounded. Celebrate what you've accomplished together." That night, the sacred grove filled with the sound of celebration that seemed to make the very stones sing in harmony. Human and Alari voices rose together in songs that needed no translation, telling stories of courage and sacrifice that would echo through generations yet unborn. Children of both species played together while their parents planned a future among the stars. Warriors compared scars and shared techniques, their respect transcending species barriers. Healers worked side by side, learning from each other's knowledge of anatomy and medicine. Kevin sat with Zara beside the sacred pool, watching alien stars emerge in the darkening sky. The life bond between them had deepened throughout the day, carrying not just thoughts and emotions, but dreams and hopes for the tomorrow they'd fought to win. "Do you think we'll make it?" Zara asked softly, her small hand tracing patterns on his arm. "All the way to the stars, like the visions showed us?" Kevin thought of the long journey ahead, building ships from salvaged materials and alien metals, training crews who'd never seen space, facing unknown dangers in the void between worlds. It would take generations, maybe centuries, to achieve the future they'd glimpsed in the sacred waters. But humanity had always been explorers at heart, and the Alari had always been survivors. Together, they could accomplish anything the universe threw at them. "We'll make it," he said with quiet certainty, born of absolute faith. "And when we do, the galaxy will never be the same." High above them, the triple stars of Zirion Prime burned with ancient light, waiting for new visitors to discover their secrets. Around them, the sacred grove hummed with life and possibility, sheltering two species that had found something worth dying for. And more importantly, something worth living for. In the months that followed, the Human-Alari alliance grew stronger with each passing day. New settlements sprang up in the regions once dominated by the Cathari, their mixed populations thriving in ways neither species had achieved alone. The life bond phenomenon spread throughout both cultures, creating a network of connection that transcended traditional boundaries. Kevin found himself appointed as the first human Alari ambassador, responsible for maintaining the delicate balance between two very different cultures learning to become one. It was challenging work. Humans were naturally individualistic and aggressive, while Alari valued harmony and consensus above all else. But the life bonds made understanding possible where language barriers might have failed. Zara became his partner in everything, not just his wife, but his co-ambassador and closest advisor. Her intuitive understanding of both cultures made her invaluable in negotiations and planning sessions. Together, they laid the groundwork for the space program that would eventually carry their people to the stars. The first major crisis came 6 months after the Battle of Sacred Grove. A group of human colonists, led by a bitter engineer named Roberts, who'd lost his entire family in the crash, began advocating for human supremacy within the Alliance. They argued that advanced human technology should give them dominant status over the primitive Ilari. Kevin found himself in the middle of an ugly confrontation that threatened to tear apart everything they'd built. Roberts and his followers had taken control of the main power generator, demanding that the Ilari be relegated to second-class status within the Alliance. "We're the advanced species here," Roberts declared during a heated assembly meeting. "We have the knowledge, the technology, the superior weapons. Why should we be equal partners with creatures who still fight with bone spears?" The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Human and Ilari representatives sat on opposite sides, the careful integration of the past months threatening to unravel in a matter of hours. Kevin stood to address the assembly, feeling the weight of two species' futures on his shoulders. Through the life bond, he felt Zara's steady presence, her absolute confidence in his ability to find the right words. "Roberts, I understand your anger," Kevin began. "We've all lost people we loved. We've all suffered in ways that words can't express. But making the Ilari pay for our losses won't bring back our dead. It'll just create new graves to dig." He gestured toward the mixed crowd around them. "Look at what we've accomplished together." Human engineering and Ilari craftsmanship created defenses that held against impossible odds. Human tactical thinking and Ilari environmental knowledge saved us from extinction. Neither species could have survived alone. "Pretty words," Roberts sneered. "But when we reach the stars, who's going to be building the ships? Operating the computers? Making the real decisions? Them." He pointed dismissively at the Ilari representatives. Kevin felt a flash of anger through the life bond. Not his own, but Zara's, carefully controlled but burning bright. She stood gracefully, her small frame somehow commanding the attention of every person in the room. "May I speak?" she asked formally. Kevin nodded, curious to see how she'd handle this challenge to everything they'd built together. Zara walked to the center of the room, her movements fluid and confident. "Roberts, you speak of superior technology as if it makes you superior people. But technology without wisdom is just elaborate tools for destroying ourselves." She gestured toward the walls of the meeting hall, built from a combination of human materials and Ilari techniques. "Your ships fell from the sky because your advanced technology failed when you needed it most. Our primitive knowledge of this world's dangers is the only reason any of you are still alive." The room was silent now, everyone hanging on her words. "You want to know who will build the ships that carry us to the stars," Zara continued. "We will. All of us, together. Human knowledge and Ilari wisdom, working in harmony to create something neither could achieve alone. Because that's what the life bonds teach us, that strength comes not from dominance, but from unity." Roberts started to object, but Zara wasn't finished. "You fear being equal to us because you believe equality diminishes you," she said gently. "But true strength comes from lifting others up, not standing on their backs. The Cathari believed in dominance, in the superiority of the strong over the weak. Look where it led them." The assembly erupted in discussion, but Kevin could see the tide turning. Zara's words had struck home, reminding everyone of what they'd fought for and what they'd achieved together. The crisis passed when Roberts himself, faced with the unified opposition of both species, backed down from his demands. But the incident taught Kevin an important lesson about the challenges they'd face in building their new civilization. The first ship launched 3 years after the Battle of Sacred Grove, a hybrid design that combined human engineering with Ilari craftsmanship in ways that created something entirely new. It carried a mixed crew of 50 volunteers to Zerion Prime's nearest neighboring system, establishing humanity's first interstellar colony. Kevin and Zara stood together watching the launch, their hands clasped as the silver ship rose into the alien sky on pillars of controlled fire. Through the life bond, Kevin felt Zara's wonder and excitement as if they were his own emotions. "Sarah would have loved this," he said softly, thinking of his first wife's dreams of planting earth flowers under alien suns. "She's part of this too," Zara replied, squeezing his hand. "Every choice you make, every dream you chase, she lives on in them." More ships followed, exploration vessels, cargo haulers, passenger transports carrying families to new worlds. The Human-Alari Alliance became a spacefaring civilization, spreading across dozens of star systems in the span of a single generation. But they never forgot their origins on Zerion Prime. The Sacred Grove became a pilgrimage site for both species, the place where young couples came to forge their own life bonds under the ancient trees. The Guardians still tended the sacred pool, showing new generations the visions of what was possible when different peoples chose cooperation over conflict. Kevin and Zara had children, 3 of them, each unique blends of human and Alari traits. Their eldest daughter, Sarah, named for Kevin's first wife, inherited Kevin's strategic mind and Zara's intuitive wisdom, becoming the first hybrid to command an interstellar exploration fleet. Their sons became diplomats and scientists, carrying their parents' legacy to ever more distant worlds. The youngest, barely 5 years old, already showed signs of forming life bonds with children of both species, promising an even more integrated future. As the years passed and their hair grew gray, Kevin and Zara would often return to the Sacred Grove to walk among the silver trees and remember their first meeting. The life bond between them had only grown stronger with time, creating a connection so deep that they could communicate without words across vast distances. No regrets. Zara would ask sometimes, usually when they were watching sunset paint the alien sky in shades of gold and crimson. None, Kevin would always reply, pulling her close. We built something beautiful together. And they had. The galaxy was full of human Alari colonies now, their populations living in harmony that would have seemed impossible just decades before. The Cathari had been contained to a few isolated worlds, their savage culture gradually giving way to more civilized approaches. Other species had sought alliance with the Human-Alari Confederation, recognizing the benefits of cooperation over conquest. It wasn't perfect. No civilization ever was, but it was hopeful. And hope, Kevin had learned, was the most precious gift any generation could leave for their children. When the time finally came for Kevin and Zara to pass beyond the physical world, they died as they had lived. Together, their hands clasped as the life bond carried them into whatever came after. Their children buried them beneath the silver trees of the Sacred Grove, where legend said the first alliance had been forged in starlight and sealed with courage. The tiny alien woman and her human warrior had kept their promise to each other and to the future. 2 souls, 1 heart, until the stars themselves grew cold and dark. But their legacy lived on in the children who carried both their bloodlines and their dreams to distant worlds, in the ships that bore their names to undiscovered systems, in the bonds of love and trust that connected dozens of species across the galaxy. In the end, Kevin reflected in his final moments. That was what mattered most. Not the battles won or the enemies defeated, but the love shared and the hope passed on of those who would continue the journey to the stars.